So it looks like we have 30 something attendees. Okay, we'll just get going here. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our This Is How We Do It webinar series, where we discuss topics that help our customers streamline and improve their operations. We know IT operation teams are being asked to do more with less. That's the new reality. This is the first session in a series of 6. I'm Alaji Pui. I lead the pre-sales technical team for CDW Canada. My team is responsible for helping our clients achieve the business outcomes that they are driving towards. I'm truly grateful for the opportunity to spend the next hour with you to discuss how our strategic partner, Cisco, has utilized its own solutions and technology to run its IT operations. As they call it, eat its own dog food. This means the solutions have to deliver on the demands of running Cisco's own critical operations. Talk about quality control at its best. Ultimately, this leads to better change management, best practices, and overall improved products. Today's topic is on full stack observability, FSO. This topic is very relevant to today's complex technology stack. Applications need to run 24/7 by 365 to continuously deliver experience to clients. Organizations can't afford a downtime, much less extended periods of application outage. In fact, the goal is to anticipate potential outages before they happen and proactively prevent them. FSO tools are critical to making this goal a reality. Our speaker today is Cliff Dienhart from Cisco. Cliff is an 18-year veteran with Cisco. He's the architecture lead for Cisco IT's implementation of ServiceNow for ITSM and configuration management. He's also the lead architect for service assurance within Cisco IT, covering all of infrastructure, databases, and applications. We are very excited to have Cliff share with us some of the tools and solutions that Cisco has deployed internally and how this has helped streamline its global operations. Without further ado, over to you, Cliff.
Thanks very much. I appreciate that. As Alaji mentioned, I have been in IT for quite some time, and we have seen the evolution from everyone doing everything in-house and in our own data centers to this migration to the public cloud. And as we evolve, we have to keep everything alive and working and humming along, and it only gets more and more complicated over time. So we're going to see how IT is dealing with that underneath the covers, and how because we, in my group in particular, right, we're charged with keeping IT running at the end of the day, be it through Cisco tools and sometimes non-Cisco tools, just making sure that Cisco has what it needs at all times. And with that, we probably should start. My mouse has disappeared here. There we go. Sorry about that. Oh, well, we'll talk about the agenda here. I'm going to go very briefly over a definition of full stack observability. Look at Cisco's use cases, the primary 7 use cases that we're focusing on broadly, and then get right into the architecture that we use in IT for our observability. Talk about that pane of glass that everyone likes to hunt for, and then show a few use cases of where our observability has really started to shine for us and help us out tremendously. And so with that, I do want to start with the definition of full stack observability, because if you ask 10 people, you generally will get 11 answers on what it actually means. And I stole this from the AppD website because I thought it was perfect, because it is very broad, as full stack seems to imply. But it's got to cover not just your applications and whether they're running. That is the ultimate point, making sure that the services you're providing are out there. But to do that efficiently, you have to be able to monitor your compute, your storage, your services, the network, the whole of it, and then bring that data together to tie it in. And it starts to be used not only by your enterprise operations folks, who are the frontline defense for major outages and whatnot, but it's used by the infrastructure owners themselves to make sure that their individual services are running as they expect. It's used by application owners to make sure that the application is performing the way it should before, hopefully, there's an outage. So observability helps to provide that predictiveness of problems before they happen, or at least before they're recognized by your customer. So there's a lot to it, and it's a very big field. Um, Here at Cisco, we've been focusing on these 7 primary use cases. You've probably seen versions of this slide before. Hybrid application monitoring, cloud native monitoring, digital experience. And so in IT, we're focused very much on the left and the right, and we're working toward the center, being the hybrid cost optimization and such. But we are, of course, actively using AppDynamics and ThousandEyes and other tools, which we're going to see in just a moment. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to the architecture that we have inside of Cisco IT. And this is the conceptual version of it. And I call this the hourglass slide for, well, for reasons that will become apparent in a moment. And the first thing that we realized when we were getting into this or revisioning this about 7 or 8 years ago was that if we're going to do assurance, if we're going to do observability, we have to know what we're assuring, right? What we're observing. We need a common definition. And we get that data into a CMDB, configuration management database, an inventory of all the stuff that we've got. And it comes from a lot of different sources, right? So we've got discovery tools that are out there discovering, finding things and providing information about them. Domain management tools, provisioning tools, where we're spinning up resources in AWS, for instance, or even in our local clouds, providing that information in. Service mapping tools, different catalogs. All of this data is coming from all over. We bring it together into our CMDB and normalize the data there. So it's sort of the choke point, first choke point of an hourglass, to normalize it so that when I say, here's the hosts, the compute hosts that I have, you know where the list is coming from. It doesn't matter if I got some of it from discovery and some of it from domain management, and somebody called it an apple and somebody called it an orange. I brought them together to say they're all fruit, right? And so we normalize that in the CMDB, so we have that common layer of what we're talking about, and as much of the interdependencies as we can. And then, now that we've got that nice tight hourglass neck, we have to blow it out again because we're going to be monitoring that with all sorts of different tools. As few as possible, but that still ends up being a considerable number. To do our infrastructure monitoring, do synthetic transactions on services, network monitoring, application monitoring, etc. And each of those have their own data model. Each one has its own taxonomy. They have their own way of looking at things. And so we need to bring it together again into another neck of the hourglass, if you can imagine it, and normalize that at our event correlation and AI ops layer. So that if one of them is saying code red and the other one is saying severity 4, we know that they mean the same thing, or we've mapped them to mean the same thing. So there's a common view of the events for our operation centers to use in that event correlation layer. So now, looking at the detailed version of this, when we get down to what tooling we're using, and I won't drain the bottom here too much, but we do have a lot of data coming from a lot of different inventory sources, feeding up into ServiceNow, which we're using as our CMDB. From there, as I mentioned, we blow it out and we start scanning with a lot of different tools. And of course, ThousandEyes and AppDynamics and SecureX and homegrown cron jobs and third-party systems, right? Splunk and Science Logic and AWS CloudWatch, etc. So the story for IT necessarily has to include assurance data, observability data from many different sources, some inside, some outside of Cisco to get the best possible picture. Because, for instance, like with the Oracle Enterprise Manager, that's what's going to monitor Oracle better than the system that's actually running it when you have it. And that's OEM, and it's providing that data for us. So we bring all of that together into an event management platform that we built in-house called Chain. And so we're pushing the event data up. Now, not the logging and not the trace routes, or not trace routes, but the telemetry, excuse me. But the events are going up into Chain and being leveraged there by our EOC, the Enterprise Operations Center. Those are the folks that are up at 2 o'clock in the morning waiting for something to go wrong so they can jump on a bridge and get people moving on it as quickly as possible. And so it's at that level that we're bringing together the data from ThousandEyes and AppDynamics and Splunk and et cetera to correlate it all together so they can see it all happening. And instead of getting 30 different error messages or alerts from 30 different tools, they get those 30 events going up into chain and chain saying, hey, these 6 are all the same event. They're just all symptoms of the same problem. I'll correlate those together for you and tell you that there's one problem you've got to deal with, and here's where it is. So all of that is happening at that chain level that we have there. And I often get asked, so I'll go ahead and mention it here, a homegrown tool there. There are tools in this space, right? Big Panda, Event Pro, MoogSoft, ServiceNow has event management. There's a lot of tools in that space. But what we found when we started looking at this about 6 years ago, when we put this into place, was that at the time, we weren't really ready for prime time in terms of making sure that we had all of these systems organized and were able to pump in the data in a normalized way. But also that the tooling, in our estimation, wasn't ready at the time either. Now, this was 6 years ago, but a lot of them had just begun doing event correlation, and even if we could get that data in there, they weren't quite ready for it. So we decided to walk before we ran and started building out this homegrown solution to do our own AI ops in, and it's now become a pretty robust system internally. And when you look at this slide, you may find that, oh look, Cisco IT is using 9 tools or 12 tools for doing its observability. And unfortunately, that's just for the sake of having a pleasant looking slide. The reality is that there's a lot more tools out there that are providing assurance in some way, shape, or form, providing feedback to our operators in some way that have to be taken into account over time. And a point to that, and the reason that there's such a wide swath of tools, and a lot of companies find this to be true as well, is that companies are broken down by groups. Infrastructure systems or infrastructure groups are generally broken down by the services being provided. You've got the network team, the compute team, the database team, a lot of application teams, plural, for each of the major classes of applications, the storage team, etc. And generally, each of those teams is responsible for their service. I mean, that's how you would expect it to work. So if and when the network goes down, we choke the neck of the network owner. Well, with that responsibility, they take the accountability and the authority to say, I'm going to decide what tools get used to monitor my network. And so we have a wide selection, again, that other slide, a wide selection of tools that are being used because of that division. People say, if I'm going to be responsible for it, I'm going to use what I think is best. And we've worked with them and constantly do work with them to refine that and make sure that there's rationality behind all these, and there are rationalities behind all of these. So necessarily, every organization is going to end up with a large number of these tools. One side note, by the way, once upon a time, my direct organization that I work with, which provides the foundational tools like ThousandEyes and AppDynamics and Science Logic for some more generic infrastructure work, was once responsible for doing the network monitoring for the network division group. But our network team has decided, as they should have, and it's a good idea, to move that into CMS. So Cisco's internal IT network is now being run and managed and monitored by the same service that our customers use in the CX, BU. So we've moved monitoring out of our direct use into that, but we're also feeding that back into chain so that we have it internally as well. So there's always moving and always changing. And as soon as you get this boiled down to just the set of tools that you want to use, a new piece of technology is going to come in, or a new way of monitoring is going to come in, and you're going to be adding to it. So it's a living, growing organism. And with that, one thing that people often want to reach out for or reach for is that single pane of glass, right? And you have all of those tools, and you ask yourself, well, can't we just have it in one place? Where's the one place I go to see everything that I need to see? So they go for, and we want that single pane of glass, one-stop shop for that experience, right? Where can I go to see it all, analyze it all, and get what I need? Uh, I posit very often that the single pane of glass is actually a myth, right? The idea of having so many of those different tools, taking all of their data, pumping all of it into one place, one visualization layer, even if you're not putting it into one data lake, one place you can go to visualize it all. And that's going to serve both your operations center and your infrastructure managers and your application owners and your operators, the propeller heads that are looking to find out exactly what happened at 2:35 and 16 seconds on this particular box. Putting all that in one interface doesn't really work out. What I've suggested instead, or what I generally suggest instead, is the stained glass window metaphor. I think is a much better one, because you're taking those different tools and you're not abandoning them. You're not just sucking the data out of them and putting all of your data in one big glass. You're welding them together. You're putting that data together in a way that makes sense when you stand back and look at it from a 10,000 foot view, and it correlates things and says, here's the fleur-de-lis, right? Here's 5 events that go into one actual problem that you need to solve. But once you've gotten that 10,000 foot view and you need to get into the weeds, into the gory details, right? You're going to drill down into each of these panes, quite possibly, and you're going to go into AppDynamics and use the rich analytics that AppDynamics is providing and the metrics and the telemetry that it's got to know, get a better picture of what's going on, right? Or you're going to do that with ThousandEyes and explore the network transactions that have been flying around. And to try to take that rich set of analytics from ThousandEyes and AppDynamics and any of the other tools, and to say we're going to do all of that in a single pane just doesn't really work. You're going to, so you need a balance is what it boils down to. And I think the idea of welding together those so that you have both at your fingertips makes the most sense. So with that said, let's talk about a couple of cases that have where both AppDynamics and ThousandEyes have really been a boon for us in IT itself. And the first is some lag we had in support case management. As everyone here is, or most people here are probably aware, SCM is the tool that people go into to register when they have a problem that they need to report. And the last thing you want people to experience is a problem in the problem management system for obvious reasons. But we were having some. There was some lag that was coming up and some challenges. And as you know, by the time someone has called you to say that there's a problem, 10 other people, maybe more, probably more, have already been frustrated and gone away. And that's never a good thing. So AppDynamics now has been on board for quite some time and is doing those transactions for us, monitoring the business transactions as they fly around and telling us ahead of time when there's a problem. So ideally, we know before it becomes a serious problem, but at a minimum, we know the moment it becomes an active problem, a system down problem, and we can start to chase it. So by the time anyone's calling, if they ever get to that point, we can say, oh, yes, we know about that, and they're working on the repair and whatnot. What that has led to us for, and this is a measure of quarter over quarter from 21 to 22, 50% improvement in detection and root cause analysis for us. 15% fewer cases being created. Now that number, I would expect, you might expect to be a higher number generally, but what's happening there is we are still creating cases when a problem is detected. So the fewer cases that were created at that 15% level, the fewer cases that were created were because we were able to proactively fix a problem before it rose to the level of being an incident. And then lastly, here on the right, our downtime being reduced from about 3.5 hours to about 2 hours, which is a significant reduction, particularly when you're dealing with a system like this, which needs to be always on. Let's look now at some examples for ThousandEyes, where we had latency and jitter in WebEx. So our employees in our Bangalore offices were experiencing some loss of messaging when using WebEx. Now, WebEx is a service that we host out on the cloud. So when we started to use ThousandEyes to monitor for that, previously, of course, we'd have to run the trace routes. An engineer would have to go in and start tooling all this up. And if everyone out there has an ISP at home, we all have ISPs at home, and you call them and say the network is causing a problem, the answer is always, without fail, bounce your own router, fix your own network. It's not our problem, it's yours. Right? But with ThousandEyes now, at a corporate level, we have that same problem. With ThousandEyes, though we have those transactions, we're monitoring the transactions and running some of our own, and we can see where the problem actually is and where it actually was. And at the time, we were able to determine that the lag that they were experiencing was a loss between the ISP's last device and the public cloud in the cloud. So I think it was GCP. So we were actually able to reach out with data in hand to say, yeah, there's a problem with the network, and by the way, here it is. It's your box connected to GCP. It's causing a problem. This is where you need to go make the fix, which makes the debate much shorter, and it lets you get to the problem causing system considerably faster. So we're finding that to be a great boon for us. Likewise, while AppDynamics does an amazing job when, particularly when you deploy the agent with your applications that you've developed, and getting you that rich data around the performance and around the messaging. Um, uh, um, when you have a SaaS solution, for instance, or a third-party internal solution that you've deployed, but often with a SaaS solution, you can't, of course, deploy AppD with it. Now, AppD does have some end-to-end abilities, but this is where ThousandEyes really starts to shine, in that you can run synthetic transactions against the SaaS solution. So instead of monitoring from the inside out, like AppDynamics is primarily doing, you monitor from the outside in with ThousandEyes and say, here are the key services that I expect to be performant, and I'm going to track them over time and report them over time. And as this example here goes into, we were experiencing a problem with Salesforce.com where a process would hang, a call would hang 1 out of every 10 times. And as you guys probably know, that's one of the most frustrating kinds of problems you can run into, because you call up tech support or you get to somebody who knows what they're doing, and they go, well, let me try that. And they try it and it works. They try it again and it works. They try it again and it works. And they go, ha ha ha, you're silly. And they send you on your way. Right. But the reality was, when measured over time, we could reliably say, look, 1 out of every 10 of these are hanging for about 3 minutes and it's causing a problem. So it makes it undeniable. So it's a good way to be able to test our SLA with our providers. And with that, we're of course able to do that and fail over more quickly, get them to fail over for us to the backup systems until they could find out where that instability was coming from. So again, it becomes especially when you're dealing with multiple organizations, in this particular case, like Salesforce.com, and the ISP in the last example, it really becomes a great way to hone in the conversation and really find where the problem is. Because I think a lot of people here have probably been on that bridge. I know I have, at 2 o'clock in the morning, when you've got someone from every single group. And if you've got external sources like this, someone from the ISP and someone from Salesforce.com, and you're all on a bridge and you're all trying to rationalize out in your head where the problem came from and where the problem might lie. And the reality is, now we can know. Makes life a lot easier. So the last example I've got for you here is where we use, going back to AppDynamics here, and the secure application facet or capability they've got. When Log4Shell came around, a vulnerability got exposed in December of 2021, or identified in December of 2021. And everybody was scrambling to try to figure out where they were vulnerable to this, what apps they had that were using Log4Shell, not only their own apps that they were custom built, but apps that they had brought in from the outside, third-party apps that they had deployed, right? Where were these vulnerabilities? And CSA was able to provide for us a quick reference to our most critical applications to say, this one's vulnerable, this one isn't, this one is, this one isn't. And we were much, it was much easier for us to hone in on exactly where those problems were were coming from, and exactly which of the applications we had were vulnerable to that particular exploit. And we're finding as other exploits come around, SQLi and Spring for Shell, and they keep coming. The big ones do, and even then there's hundreds of little ones that keep coming along. That having tools like this, and CSA in particular, has provided us the speed that we need to protect ourselves before somebody finds it and exploits it. And so with that, let me take a break here, and we'll go to the chat board and see if there are any questions yet. Let's see here. All right, I am not seeing any. So, are there active questions? If not, I can go on and go do a little bit more detail on AppDynamics and what facets of it we're using, ThousandEyes as well, and kind of do a double click down on the key systems that my organization is providing others as well. All right, and I will with that. Why did it not click? Okay, so with AppDynamics again, we are using most of AppDynamics features. We're using a little bit less of the BizIQ today and a little bit less of the infrastructure monitoring because we're doing infrastructure monitoring through many other sources. But primarily the things in blue here are what we're working with, and that's the end user experience monitoring, geolocation, device and browser experiences, etc. And of course, application monitoring, APM. That's the bread and butter for us, being able to monitor, embed the application, the AppD agent with the application, and find out what services are dependent on. We're feeding that data back into the CMDB to have a static understanding of what applications are talking to what applications. So that can be leveraged again by change management and incident management and all of the other ITSM capabilities that need it, vulnerabilities. Monitoring, of course, the business transactions like we talked about. So we have that data as well. We can start to use the AppD abilities to trend that over time and find anomalies to attempt to predict where our problems may start coming from. And you see the list, right? Load, response times, snapshots to drill down, etc. And we're also using it for much of our database monitoring now as well. And on to ThousandEyes itself. So ThousandEyes, where it's becoming very, very handy for us is in our evolution from the private cloud into the public cloud. Now, no company, I don't believe, few companies anyway, will ever really go fully public cloud. There's always going to be some measure of internal data center needs. At least there will be at Cisco, and I think every large corporation would say the same. But there is an evolution from and to. And as you move into that public cloud space, you do have all the problems that come with it. You have the network problems of trying to get from your local network through your ISP and your vendors up into that cloud space. And that was the use case that we saw and talked about before. And you've got, again, the other use case, right? Being able to monitor the services that are out there, and whether they be SaaS solutions, which are monitoring from the outside in, or just access through the network of that particular cloud provider to the application that we have ourselves deployed in the public cloud. ThousandEyes is helping track exactly where those problems are coming from. And we have, let's see, we'll jump down to this one. And sorry. And so one of the other values that we get out of course, is being able to identify where problems are coming from based on location, right? So an application may be running perfectly well in San Jose, and everybody in San Jose can get to it, and everybody in San Jose is very, very happy. And so it's running, it's humming along. And if you look at the app logs, 100% it's out there and available. But if the network doesn't allow it to be reached from, say, Belgium, then you've got downtime. People in Belgium are saying the application is down. Now it's not down, it's up, but it's not accessible, so it's the same difference, right? And ThousandEyes gives us the ability to monitor not just the application, but the application as perceived from places all around the globe. And for that matter, even if you wanted to, on individual laptops. And we're doing this in some specific cases. We have laptops deployed in a lot of places, and the ability to kind of turn on monitoring from that particular customer to see their transactions at that time and to switch it off inside the network. But the ability now to recognize that application availability or application performance and uptime has to include availability. Because again, perfectly running application in an inaccessible network is pointless. A little bit about our infrastructure monitoring as well. Again, we do this primarily. So we needed and have a what we call unified monitoring, and that's being done today for us by Science Logic, where we wanted the ability to have generic monitoring capabilities, right, for all kinds of devices from all over the place. So we're using that generic tool to be able to create those very specific monitors, those power packs they call them, that we use in Science Logic, to be able to monitor a little bit of everything. And none of it goes in like terribly deep often. Sometimes it does, but very often it's just a rudimentary monitoring that we're getting from it. But it does kind of provide us sort of a broad-based foundation for monitoring anything at the end of the day to a measure. And then, of course, over on the right, we have, again, that list of lots and lots of different tools that we're using for specialized infrastructure monitoring. And not all of that data on the right necessarily gets published up into that event correlation platform that we talked about, chain, for the purposes of our EOC operation centers to correlate and look at. A lot of that data on the right is used by the operators themselves, the owners of those devices, to get to the nitty gritty, if you will, both configuration management and assurance itself. Well, a little bit about the architecture that we're using for our Science Logic stack, but we don't necessarily need to go into that at the moment. And last but not least, a little word about chain that we're using ourselves. And this, again, is our event management, our event correlation platform that we've developed to be platform agnostic. It's actually built mostly on top of an Elk stack at this point. It provides those insights for us, that 10,000-foot stained glass window view. It also provides a dashboard for our operation centers to use. And this becomes very important because it's not just about getting the assurance. It's seeing the data that's coming in, the events that are coming in, but it's also about being more efficient for those operators, for those people in the EOC, to be able to get to what they want. So in this case, that data is coming in, they can see a problem, and they can see that they've got a problem with this host and this database and this application, or these two applications are down. And with each of those, that one dashboard is also bringing in data from change management. It's going to bring in data from incident management. It's going to say, hey, these 5 changes occurred in the last quarter for the resources that are part of this problem that you're dealing with. And here are the incidents that have happened for that device over the last 3 years. Maybe it's common, right? So you get all this. It's all available to them in different systems, but it is bringing it together for that 10,000-foot view to kind of put it in one place and let them see that. Now, if they want to get the details of the incident or the details of the change, they jump out into, in this case, ServiceNow for us to get those gory details and find the exact people who are responsible for it. And all the links are in this page of efficiency, if you will. And then we also have in there the dependencies coming out of that CMDB. So I mentioned those before, and how we are collecting not just what infrastructure we have and what apps we're running, but as much as possible, where the dependencies are. This application is being run on these 5 hosts in data center A and these 7 hosts in data center B. And this application is talking to that database, and it's talking to that other application. And a lot of this data we can get from AppDynamics as it's monitoring all of that. And we build that into the CMDB so that our operations center can now look at the dependencies and see what else might be affected by the outage that they're working on, or what might have caused the outage that they're working on. So all of that is being woven up into this one particular platform, and being provided to our operations centers. They can get that bridge open at 2 in the morning and more easily and readily hone in on exactly who they need to reach out to solve these problems as quickly as possible. Oh, and this slide here, I probably should have flipped this just a second ago. It is saying basically what I just did, right? We detect first, visualize it, correlate it, get the insights, and then do the engage and act, right? So make it efficient for the operations teams to be able to execute on them. And as we evolve further on, we found that we're taking those baby steps now into AI ops, artificial intelligence, using machine learning, not just to identify outages, but to help to identify the problems and to predict the problems over great amounts of time, right? Where you say, well, when I see, I'm going to make this up here, but when I see CPU rates trending on this set of hosts, there's always been an application outage on application A after, 5 hours of that or whatnot. And that kind of logic starts to get built into the IOPS where it starts to detect that and be able to throw predictive recommendations out. Now we're, again, in the early stages of that. But it is coming along well and starting to get leveraged by our operations teams. And I see we have a question. What use cases did you start with and challenges did you have in implementing these solutions? So the use cases that we faced early on, well, really, sadly, all of them, because it was all happening, right? So the story of assurance at Cisco and probably at every single company isn't one of not having assurance and then saying let's go chase the problem and let's assure things, right? With over time, we've always had some flavor of monitoring, some flavor of testing going on since the dawn of the company. And so we used to have a system called EMAN, Enterprise Management. That was around for about 20 years, a homegrown system, which was doing our monitoring for us. And we had built out our own infrastructure monitoring, heartbeat tests, are you alive kind of tests, very basic tests like that. Then we got into doing the trending. So it's not that we actually jumped in on one use case when we started. What drove, I guess, what might be considered this modern evolution of ours, modern generation of ours, was that we were replacing that EMAN system, enterprise management. It served really well over 20 years, but it had become everything. It was address management. It was our CMDB, as it were, as our application portfolio. It had every bit of infrastructure in it. It was our change management. It was incident management. It had all of this built into it. And it was all kind of built out over time. So, like any system, once it evolved so much, it became very intertwined. And so we were looking to disengage from that and to start anew, if you will. And with that, we knew that we were stepping away from infrastructure management, and we needed a good way to do both our infrastructure management and our application monitoring. And one of the challenges that we ran into, as you mentioned, or as you asked, was around making sure that we had both the breadth, the breadth that we needed, but also the depth. And it's very difficult to find that, and certainly in any one tool. So what we decided to do at the time was for that generic monitoring, just to almost to say heartbeat monitoring to oversimplify, right? But just a generic monitoring tool, we did start to leverage Science Logic as a way, it's a platform on which you can build monitors for just about anything you want. And it does have power packs which do some good in-depth monitoring, and that's excellent. But it was sort of a bit of a stopgap for us, especially on the application front, where we were using it to do synthetic transactions against our applications, and that's good, right? Heartbeat monitoring against your application service to make sure it's accessible. But it didn't provide that outside in like ThousandEyes does, and it didn't provide the inside out that AppDynamics does. So once we got a baseline set up where we could just it wasn't quite this simple, but we could essentially heartbeat a lot of things. We then started working toward implementing AppDynamics and ThousandEyes later in order to provide that richer set of data, particularly for our most critical systems, right? We have a 5-tier system, C1 through C5. 1, 2, and 3 are the most critical for us. And for those that are eligible, we've gotten 96, I think, percent of them, if I recall, onto AppDynamics and using AppDynamics to give us that richer, much richer set of data and dependency data and business transactions and such. So it's there hasn't been an individual challenge, I guess, from that perspective. I mean, it's just been it's a constant evolution. Maybe that is the biggest challenge, is that it is constantly evolving. What you need to know to get to reduce your risk and to reduce your downtime to as little as possible. What you need to know changes over time, and the moment you think you've got it, new technology shows up, or somebody says, "Hey, we're using GCP and AWS, and that's great, but we're gonna also throw half our stuff on HostGator, right?" And so now you've got to go figure out how to do assurance in HostGator, and whether you're going to do that yourself and whatever else. So there's always that and so that live dynamic nature of the industry makes it a job that'll never go away. One of the other challenges that I think I mentioned earlier, but I would kind of refer back to now is that I don't want to say siloed because we work all well together, but that divisional nature within Cisco and every organization, I assume, you get the network team, the storage team, the compute team, etc. Um, we are always, making sure that we're providing each of those teams the foundation that they need, and also working with them to make sure that they step back every now and then and make sure that they're paying the attention to assurance that they should be paying and to their own portfolio. And that's why about 2 years ago, we did go through a process of reconciliation where we went out to each of the teams and said, hello, networking people, we see that you've got, I'm making up numbers here, so don't quote me, but you've got 37 tools that you're using for network monitoring. Let's walk through those and see if you've got overlap or what's not really being used anymore, and whittle that down to 25 or 20 or whatever. So we worked with those teams in a consulting role. So that sort of herding of cats in a way, that sort of um, organizational challenge is something that a lot of customers are going to run into, and so it's just another facet of how it's a very living, dynamic problem that that we have to solve for. Um, what can we see in the roadmap? That's a really good question. So the most exciting thing for me that is coming, and I do not have gory details on it, and everything that I say about this from this point on should be considered what I think I heard at some point. So don't go back and say, well, Cliff said Cisco is going to have this by next Thursday, because it's, but we are working on the FSO platform, a way to bring a lot of this data together, a lot of the analytics together. The whole melt story, I didn't mention melt earlier, right? But there's metrics, events, logging, and telemetry, the four core pillars of observability. And so we're working on a platform to help bring all of that together and to be able to see more of it in one place. And that sounds like that single pane of glass, in a way. And it's definitely, in my mind, it's definitely going to a better stained glass image, if you will. But there will still always be the systems that the data is coming from, AppDynamics and ThousandEyes and Intersight and others, that the operators are still diving and getting into. But roadmap wise, that's one of the most exciting for me, because to see a place that we produce where all that's being pulled into one, and they're even thinking about using chain as part of the observability story for that, the event side of that. Um, that's coming now. Roadmap wise, don't ask me for dates, don't ask me for feature sets, in the explicit. Um, but I know there's a lot of excitement around that in particular. Inside IT, again, it's more evolution than revolution. As a matter of fact, it's kind of a running joke in my group about that slide, the two slides I showed the early on, the with that progression going up, the hourglass slides. I've been using those for the better part of 5 years. They change, right? But the story of observability is never really different from that. You can change the tools out within it, but ultimately you have to know what you've got. You have to observe it and monitor it and collect your data, and you have to bring it together in some way that can be made sense of at that 10,000 foot level. And frankly, I could have made that slide 30 years ago if I'd been around, and I almost was, which is scary. But I could have made that slide 30 years ago, and it's still true today. So I do get mocked for reusing ancient slides, but it's just the truth. So again, it's evolution. It's the constancy of change. One of the recent things I noticed this is roadmap. It's a recent milestone on that roadmap is that evolution from our own internal monitoring of our network to using CMS solution for that. And so, any other questions? Looking down to the chat. Going once. Going twice. All right. Well, I am still here, and feel free to reach out anytime if you have other questions or not. It is I think actually cliff.dienhart@cisco.com will work. Yeah, evolution is definitely the operative word. And I think I mentioned earlier, it is like much like herding cats very often. But with that, I suppose we'll pass it back over to Alaji.
Yep. Thank you so much, Cliff, for walking us through how Cisco utilizes its own technology to drive operational effectiveness and also improve end user experience. That's really what it's all about. I know I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the audience did as well. To our valued clients, if you would like to learn more about some of the topics or solutions that have been highlighted during today's session, my team of experienced solution architects are on standby to support you. Our pre-sales activities are at no cost to you. So please, please, please reach out. As I mentioned earlier, this is the first webinar in a series. The upcoming ones will be on ServiceNow, which Cliff did touch on today, Zero Trust, Risk Advisory Services, and Security Operations Center, multi-domain networking, and Network as a Service. Some really, really exciting and relevant topics in today's climate. So thank you so much again for taking the time out of your busy schedule to spend this past hour with us. Hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I hope to see you at your next one. Thank you, everyone.